welcome to this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. The Farmers Weekly Question Time event recorded at Harper Adams University in Shropshire on Thursday the 14th of November 2024. Recorded in front of a live studio audience, our Question Time events give farmers the opportunity to quiz industry leaders on topical agricultural issues. This episode focuses on the UK government's autumn budget decision to impose 20% inheritance tax on farming assets worth more than £1 million. We hope you find it a useful debate. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Farmers Weekly Question Time event, kindly hosted for us here at Harper Adams University in Shropshire. A warm welcome to you all. I'm your host, Johan Tasker, and I'd like to thank this evening's sponsor, Lantra, for making the event possible. Lantra is one of the UK and Ireland's leading bodies for training and knowledge in the land-based industries, dedicated to developing the workforce for over 40 years. Training and knowledge in all walks of life is important, including in farming, which brings us to our panel of experts who'll be answering your questions this evening. On my immediate right, Julia Buckley is Labour MP for Shrewsbury and has lived in Shropshire for 20 years. Elected in July, her first constituency visit was to a local farm, and she's committed to standing up for farmers in Parliament. Next to Julia, Jeremy Moody is Secretary and Advisor at the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers. He's influenced governments on everything from agricultural policy to farm tenancies and taxation, and received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Farmers Weekly Awards 2024. On my immediate left, Staffordshire farmer Clive Bailey is owner of TWB Farms and founder of the Farming Forum, the UK's biggest online forum for agriculture. He is also one of the co-organisers of this month's London rally against government plans to impose inheritance tax on farmers. Next to Clive, dairy farmer Kelly Seaton milks a 260 pedigree Holstein herd with her husband's parents on the Shropshire-Cheshire border. Passionate about encouraging youngsters into farming, she's also Knowledge Exchange Manager for Dairy at the AHDB. And next to Kelly, Carl Berendt is Director of the Global Institute for Agtech Economics, Food, Land and Agribusiness Management here at Harper Adams. And with over 20 years' experience, his core disciplines are bioeconomic modelling, decision support for farmers, industry and policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give our panel a big Harper Adams welcome. Our first question, potato grower Michael Bubb.
My question is, does the panel think that the politicians and civil servants responsible for the budget realise that 30% of farming businesses are responsible for circa 90% of the food production? Therefore, to state 70% of farmers unaffected by IHT is ludicrous, really. And it's those 30% businesses that are highly capital intensive, land intensive, trying their best to be efficient for supermarket low margins, and they're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest.
Thank you, Michael. Shrewsbury MP Julia Buckley, inheritance tax will affect farmers more than the government says.
So the first thing to say is that the figures that the Treasury released are not future models or predictions. It was exact claims of inheritance tax, APR, from the last full financial year for where figures are available, and that's the year 2021 to 2022. And in that year, 73% of claimants of APR did not have to pay any tax. So we're not suggesting that in the future anything will be different. This isn't a hypothetical or imaginative. It's an exact number of claims, which is not the same as a number of farms. They're just people who passed away in that year and who made a claim. And I think your point, some of you, I recognise some faces, we've just come from a regional NFU meeting where I was lucky enough to hear from probably 30 or 40 farmers in the room, and a few of them made exactly the same point as you, that by including all registered farm holdings, that has therefore inevitably included some smaller properties, which may be hobby farmers or small holdings or self-sufficient people who've bought a nice big house with a few fields and a llama, rather than those for whom their sole income derives from farming. We had a bit of dialogue in the room about where would be a good place to put a threshold for me to go back to DEFRA and the Treasury and say, those statistics are very interesting. Please can we now have a look at a subset of those which tells us how many claims did you receive from farmers for whom this is their sole income, or for farms above 50 acres. And so I tried to have a bit of a dialogue to try and understand where a good cusp would be, a good threshold, because the new government is data-driven. So it's all about evidence. And their evidence from the existing claims showed that only 7% of claims in the last full year were for farms whose inheritance tax liability was over £2.5 million. And where you have a couple, whether they're married or civil partnership, their combined allowance would protect them from allowance. And so I think your point is really valid, sir, and I need to be the voice here of my constituents to go back and ask, if we remove those hobby farmers, how do those statistics look now? Does it tell us a different story? And how different is that story? So we can really unpick the impact of the policy. The other thing we touched on, which I'm sure you'll be interested in, is I'm sure you're aware, this is a proposal, not for this next budget year in April 25. It's a proposal to come in April 2026, so in 18 months' time. And for that reason, it doesn't form part of the budget bill that will be voted on. Instead, it will go out to a technical consultation, and there will be an impact assessment. And I think that's really welcome, because surely we all want to feed into that consultation, and surely we want to make sure that the parameters of that impact assessment are more useful than the current existing statistics.
Julia Buckley, thank you. Michael Bubb, you asked the question, will you be affected by inheritance tax yourself?
Yes, very much so. I mean, the thing is, the farmers that are producing the food, we borrowed serious amounts of money against serious land assets to put potato stores up, etc., to produce the potatoes efficiently. And we're the ones that are going to be hit the most, because I'm 75. To pass on to the next generation is going to cost us about £3 million, which is not the sort of cash we've got readily lying about, because we're using that cash to reinvest in the business, to live on, and there just isn't the cash there to be had.
Julia Buckley, a very real situation faced by Michael Bubb, and one faced also by many other farmers too.
So it's interesting, isn't it? We had over here the statistic that 38% of farmers are aged over 67, and you've told us, sir, that yourself, you're 75. One intention of this policy is to change behaviour and encourage senior farmers to do that succession planning, where they start to hand over parts of partnership, joint working with the next generation. I can't tell you how many farms I've visited and worked on and been to see where they talk about farmers dying in their boots and men in their 50s and 60s working hundreds of hours every week, but they actually don't control the farm anymore. And so the one intention is absolutely to encourage you to start planning your assets to protect you, so you pay less or even no inheritance tax. But a consequence of that, we hope, is to empower the next generation of farmers to have more ownership and role and leadership within these farms. It'll share the burden. You can reduce your hours and get to bed earlier. And these guys that are learning all this R&D, they can come and tell you and be more involved in some of those newer ideas. Of course.
It's just the land that hasn't gone, and it wasn't advised to be given away for various other reasons.
They might change that advice, might they, sir? No.
Sorry? Well, absolutely, yeah, in the light of this vindictive
I'm sorry that you
effort.
feel that, sir. I'm sorry.
Jeremy Moody, I'm going to go to you.
Thanks very much, because I've been up to my eyes in this for the last fortnight since it came out. And one of my roles is actually look objectively at the data, look at the evidence. I've been talking with Treasury officials and with DEFRA officials around this. Firstly, I'm just picking up a couple of points swiftly. The consultation we're promised in early New Year is only about trusts in the paperwork. It goes no further. I think whether the MP can make it go further is another story, whether that can happen. But at the moment, what's in the documentation is purely about the very technical questions around trusts, nothing more. Secondly, I think the argument about this being a deliberate policy about farming structure is a retrospective one. I mean, this, I think, is Treasury-driven to raise money. I don't think there's any ideology in it, which, again, some people look for, or this kind of theory. It appears increasingly DEFRA knew about this the night before the budget. And so no real impact on this. The pressure behind the scenes to do something around inheritance tax in these areas has been there for sort of 18 months or so. But to turn to the crunch, yes, the 74% of APR claims being below $1 million is, like a lot of figures, perfectly accurate. We believe there's no reason to challenge it, and entirely uninformative. What this forgets, because people on both sides of the argument, and there are misunderstandings clearly, I mean, the Secretary of State misspoke badly in the Commons at lunchtime, and a lot of discussion in the field misspeaks on it. The position here is that APR is simply about land. The definition of agricultural property that gets APR is agricultural land or pasture, together with ancillary livestock buildings and woodland, plus farmhouses, cottages and buildings as are of a character appropriate. And they're occupied for the purpose of agriculture. That's all it is. A farm that is working as a farm will also have machinery, it will have livestock, it will have dead stock, it will have corn in store, quite probably, it will have entitlements, it may well, or it would have done, elsewhere in the UK it would have entitlements. In the hills it will have hefted sheep, it may have other rights in a contract farming agreement where it's working on somebody else's land. It may have a diversified activity, all of that, and together with the other things that may come into that business, none of that gets APR, because that's what business property relief is there for. And what you've fundamentally got is an inheritance tax drive that is aimed at private owners of business. It happens to come with agricultural bells and whistles, which here we feel acutely. So when you start looking, if you look at the 74%, median value 486,000, well, very crudely, if there are no houses involved, that's 50 acres. If I go into the areas like Holbeach Marsh of intense double cropping land, if I go into North Wales where the dairymen compete with each other, if I go into South Armagh, again, it's 20 acres. What this covers, and I've got samples of members' inheritance tax valuations here, broadly what this covers, somebody's got a nice field around their rectory, there's a lifestyle farmer who's in there, and of course they remain entirely protected by this. The tenant who has 60 acres that he owns, so he's a tenant of 800 acres and he farms 60. He's in the 74, but his BPR claim will pull him well above it for his dairy herd. And so this is missing the point. Add APR and BPR together. What we've not been able to get out of the Treasury are the BPR claims of APR people. At the moment, they're saying it's difficult to extract, but the figures on APR is simply misleading. And when the Secretary of State today, in replying to questions in the Commons, said 3/4 of farmers would be untouched, he's simply misunderstanding the data in front of him. So you have that there, you have the missing BPR, you have what that actually covers, and then you come to this figure that's been put out that, look, a couple can get 3 million. Well, if you've got a couple to start with, and of course we're dealing with people who may be widowed at this point or just aren't in the right circumstances and where other families are and so on, ministers are trying to give simple answers to a world that's not simple. Because yes, if you have two people, they will each have $1 million, because this is a taxpayer-based relief, not a business-based relief. It's what the taxpayer owns, and that's a bit that's being missed a bit in the field. But that taxpayer, let's just say they own half the farm. So you have a couple. Each of them has a 325,000 nil rate band allowance, but the argument that that's in play for the farm assumes they have no personal effects. They have no furniture. They have no car. Now, this is, you've got to be a monk to get this into this situation, at which point you're probably not a married couple. And then you come to look at the 175 nil rate, the residential nil rate band allowance. Well, that's where you have got people who are, again, that's transferable between couples, but that is where you've got a house you've lived in that you wish to give to a descendant. The tenant living on the farm doesn't have a house he can give to a descendant. That's unavailable to him. This is rather special pleading, rather technical case, and again a point missed in the field. If it's a married couple, they can't transfer the million between them, unlike the other allowances. So this is entirely missing the point. It's entirely hitting a significant number of, and now small family farms sound like working people, it's an elastic definition, but when it is hitting serious parts of productive agriculture, and if we look ahead through the current fuss, it puts individual farmers at a disadvantage in the future land markets, because it will be the non-real people and the lifestyle farmers who will still get a relief out of this, but the non-real people, the companies, the institutions, the charities, who will not be affected by this and will have a place in the land market for which farmers will be disadvantaged by the depredations of this. It squeezes out investment. Treasury says you can spread it over 10 years. I've modelled that. You're looking at rent equivalents of between £200 and £350 an acre to pay that. There's nothing left for breakfast, let alone investment.
Jeremy Moody, thank you. I'm going to ask Clive Bailey, what are your thoughts?
I don't doubt, Julia, the Treasury are capable of looking at the data. I don't doubt that 73% is right. They're going to know their numbers. But this is the danger with raw data. It doesn't tell the story of what's behind that. Now, we all know, this is a mainly farming audience, we know that £1 million is not a viable family farm. Well, I'm sure there's exceptions, but generally speaking, the capital invested in even a relatively modest family farm is way in excess of that. You mentioned £250,000 you can spend on machinery. Before the budget, I had a quote on my desk for a £650,000 combine and a £300,000 tractor. They're both in the bin now, by the way. That investment's not happening. So, you want growth, you want investment. This isn't going to get it agriculturally. UK farming is uninvestable right now. So Jim's explained that quite well, that really you've got to look at that number again. They've got to dig into that and say what's behind it. And actually, what you're going to find, if you do that, is that's the very people that Rachel Reeves talked about kind of stopping. It's the people that have bought a nice house with a pony paddock and a few acres, and they're using APR. My own family farm, we have, contrary to popular belief in social media and the press that farmers do no succession planning, I must have spent fortunes of accountants and experts over the years making sure this situation was in order and correct. And I'm lucky, I've got a family, a father that actually is prepared to sit down and talk about his mortality. Some people really like to not even consider these things. We weren't relying as a family farm, as our farming business wasn't actually that reliant on the APR part of the issue, because we're a trading business. We enjoyed, as Jeremy's pointing out, BPR would have been the mitigation and the planning for the majority of assets on my father's death and mine ultimately for my children. The agricultural property, there would have been an element to claim that was that for some of the property, like farmhouses, that kind of thing. But that's what's making that figure look wrong. And it's everything I've done in the last week, talking on various radio things or TV things with Labour MPs. You're letting yourselves down with that, because I get what you're trying to achieve. I get the point behind this. And actually, I think as farmers, most of us probably recognise that some of that investment buying of land wasn't necessarily always a good thing. It was maybe pushing prices too high and stuff. It did need addressing, but at both ends of a scale. Now, you mentioned maybe in the room tonight you could get some feedback on where that threshold would rather be for the allowances. I don't think that's an oversimplified way of looking at it. If you simply raise that, all you're going to do is the guy who wants to buy that investment property in the countryside, rather than his budget being 1 to 2 million, he's going to go, actually, I can go to 5 million now because that's the new threshold. No, you're going to make it worse.
We're talking about the threshold. We're talking about at what size a small holding ceases to be somebody with 3 fields and it starts to become a productive
It's not just about size, though. It's about intensity. A couple of 100 acres of veg or a dairy farm would have far more capital invested in say, 100 acres than a broadacre combinable crop farm. Every farm's different. You're better to look at, is a better test. Is this actually a farmer, or is this just some guy who's made his money, retired to the countryside? Or at the other end of the scale, is this some corporate institutional investor who wants to spend £300 million on UK farmland for other reasons? But the problem there is, I was going to go through, and I'm not an accountant, but I sat down with our advisors and accountants on Tuesday morning, 4 hours, very depressing hours. Actually, my dad was crying at times in it. He's in his late 70s, just to give you some human side to this. He's in his late 70s. He doesn't enjoy the best of health. He's had some heart problems, but hopefully he can manage another 7 years, because that's going to be really important going forwards. He's got a lot to deal with my mother, who's got advanced onset dementia and Alzheimer's. And, you know, when an accountant advisor is sitting there asking a man, you know, my mother wasn't there, obviously, do you think Christine will make it to April 2026? This deadline you've set, because basically the planning, what they could do, you know, there's a different scenario for if she'd, and they're almost to the point of saying, well, you know, it would actually be, from a tax point of view, financially be better if you didn't make it that long. That's not a conversation anybody wants to have. And you said that's time to plan for people. I hate to say it, but like you're almost incentivizing death. You know, this is an industry with a horrendous suicide rate.
And it has also been said by many elderly people, I would be better off dead.
Yeah. Our farming forum, you know, people talk very open on there because they have that anonymity. There has been, you know, I hope it's in jest, but there has been forums saying, well, should we just organise a mass trip to Dignitas? You know, it's
Look,
like...
If I can just come on, I know you're making a joke of that, but it's really, really
It's not
serious.
a joke
It's not
at
a
all.
joke, it's real, yeah. They're really talking like that.
So it's really important, isn't it, that we all keep calm and that what we talk about are facts and that what we do is provide information and advice to farmers so that they can get factual, accurate information. And I do
That's
think...
great, but you're presenting 73% unaffected as a fact in every interview and every TV soundbite that there is, and it's not a fact.
Are factually correct.
No.
They may be factually correct, but DEFRA and the Treasury can't even agree on them. So how are we supposed to agree on them?
The most important point you've said here is about this anxiety in farmers and talking about, you know, wanting to commit suicide. It's really important that the media have been very sensationalist about this. And there's lots of focus on 1 million, when we know that where you have a couple, it can be up to 3 million.
No, right, just on that, like I sat with my accountant, those allowances are no use to me whatsoever. We won't use them at all.
It's important that we don't cause anxiety unnecessarily, that we keep calm.
You cause the anxiety.
You couldn't have caused more anxiety if you tried. You know, if you'd seen my father the other morning, it was ridiculous. You know, your allowances, they don't work. You know, I've got really good advisors. They're really expensive, I hate to say. And they basically, I said, oh, don't worry, we can use, you know, mum's allowance, all that stuff. And no, can't use them at all. We're going to end up, we will be able to mitigate. I went from, you say there's no succession planning. I went from a situation last Wednesday, that budget, where the liability on my parents' death, we'd planned, you know, it would have been quite manageable. It'd been, you know, £150,000 or so, but, you know, a reasonable amount that the business could afford to take forward. It's now £4.5 million. That's a big change. Now, we can mitigate on the assumption that my 78-year-old father with a heart condition manages to make another 7 years. We can do some mitigation for a really complex situation involving trusts and limited companies and all sorts of vehicles to do this.
As well as farming.
Yeah, while we're farming. But, you know, why? Yeah, and you say, and also, why announce a tax and then tell people how to mitigate their way around it? Do you want to collect the money or not?
And that was a question that was raised, but I just want to say one thing about planning at this point. What we've got is a budget announcement. We've got a fairly readable, but inevitably and naturally skeletal Treasury paper on the matter.
It's just a proposal.
It's more than that.
It's not in this year's bill.
No, that's the point I'm coming to. Because for planning purposes, we don't know what we're planning round until next summer. All this, at this stage, is simply words. And if Clive does that reorganisation, and the bill is different.
Yep. Well, the advice actually was from Tuesday, we won't do it. This is a potential plan. We won't do this till March, April, when we get that clarity.
I think you might.
I don't need 7 years. I need 7.5 years for Dad to live really now.
I think the foresight on the bill is it comes in July.
Yeah, July.
Next year.
Can we just touch on the 7 years? Because there is a taper within those 7 years. It's not all or nothing. It's not full price now and 0 at 7 years. You know there is a taper from year 3.
There is a taper from year 3.
We have an 18-month, nothing changes for 18 months from now. This is a proposal giving notice. But from year 3, it's 16% and gradually tapers down to 0%.
Can I make a clear ask on that? Something I'd like to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah, something I'd like you to take back to the Treasury.
Happy to, yeah.
So I think, you know, with what we've just said, that 38% of farmers over 67, that means there's a lot of elderly farmers that won't have that time. Yeah, I think one of the things that should come into this is give them time to plan. So I think there should be, what I'd like to see as one of the concessions to this, it'd be great to say, look, if you're an over 67-year-old farmer, we'll drop that 7 years to say 2, just to give you that time. Because planning isn't possible for people in their 80s, is it?
Yeah.
Kelly Seaton.
DEFRA are suggesting a longer phase-in date for over 70s. That was a round 2 discussion today. Is there any outcome from that?
Well, that's just this is an ongoing discussion because of feedback.
Have they moved forward on that conversation though?
So this is an ongoing conversation. So just as today I took feedback from the NFU, this evening I'm taking feedback from you. I'm part of a group of rural MPs. We met with the Treasury, we met with DEFRA so that we could try to push for a higher threshold so we can explain the impact. So this is an ongoing conversation and dialogue about the proposals and most importantly how we feed into that technical consultation. And you're quite right, if it needs to be a wider scope, the scope needs to be wider.
At the moment it's a very limited scope.
I'm going to take the gentleman there and then I'll take the gentleman. Just say who you are, where you're from.
You keep talking about couples and the reliefs. My mother-in-law, we've done all the planning, we're halfway through it. We lost father-in-law 2 years ago. Mother-in-law is on her own now, she's 91. We can't expect 7 years. This ridiculous tax is just going to blow everything out of the water. We have a 50-acre family holding, which has been in the family for 4 generations. It's in a high-value area in Cheshire, and it exceeds the figures that you're talking about because there's so many horse people around us. We are farmers. We rear dairy stock for other people, and we have a truck business as well. This has made a complete hole in all our planning, and I do have a question that I was going to ask earlier on, but it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I'll perhaps save that for later. But this assisted dying thing, mother-in-law's state of mind after all the announcement that you've created this last few weeks, her state of mind is dreadful. She is worried to death about what's going to happen to everything.
Thank you. And the gentleman over there, just say who you are and where you're from, please.
John Warburton Lee, we're small farmers from Wales. The 70% seems to me to be a complete red herring. It's not about how many people you're not going to collect the tax from. It's about the people you're going to destroy as you collect the tax. It's the effect on farms. The questions you need to be asking is within each sector of farming, what is a viable farm? Because, the arable guys will tell you that under 500, 600 acres, you can't make a living. The dairy people can't make it under 200 acres. Those businesses are probably each worth, by the time you put in their buildings, their stock, their machinery, about £10 million. In my case, I have a hill flock of 1,000 ewes on a farm that barely makes any money. And your government have kindly just given me about a £3.5 million bill. There is no question I would have to sell half of my land to face that bill, and that makes the other half uneconomic. You need to come out of the la-la land that you're living in. You need to start listening, and you need to start getting real and stop giving these lectures.
So the reason that I was agreeing with you, sir, is that when we went to speak and listen to the Treasury about their proposals, we put forward data that we asked the NFU to provide us to demonstrate that the livestock farmers can typically have a smaller footprint than arable farmers, and we felt that one unintended consequence might be that this would disproportionately affect arable farmers. So we wanted to show them how different sectors could be affected differently by it being a blanket policy. And you're absolutely right, taking information, feedback, showing and demonstrating these different impacts on different types, sectors, sizes, locations of farm, that's really important part of my job, to be able to be your voice and feed that back in. You talked about the value of your land, and I know that's really your area of expertise. But of course, for the purposes of APR, it's the agricultural value, not the market value. So those pressures on land values, whether from investors pushing them up or areas where they might not have a local plan for housing allocations, they should really be outside the values for this. This is about the intention, however badly felt, was around protecting small and medium-sized family farms from exactly the investors who are trying to not put farm to food production. The intention was where you have more than one generation, you can plan and split those assets, and where you're a smaller farm, that you would be exempt through the allowances. I want to be really clear, because I completely understand and feel your disappointment, your frustration, your anger. I completely feel it and hear it, and I can assure you I feed it back quite vocally to the people who are much further up the food chain than me. But there were lots of things that did not hit any of your media, which is the main thing you were lobbying, or the NFU were lobbying us about before the budget, wasn't this. You were lobbying us about the agricultural budget. Not only have we sustained it, but we've increased it, you know that, to 5 billion. And I think that some of the things that were also included in the budget, which is a package of measures, I'm not sure that they've cut through the media because of the upset and anxiety about this one aspect. So the 208 million around protecting from disease, the 60 million immediate payments for flood-affected farms. The last part of the budget, which I'm very sure has not cut through in the media, is exactly the point which you all refer to and every farm tells me about. It's how we can make food production profitable again. The number one problem, the reason that farmers are worrying...
There's an easy answer to that.
Would you like me to set out our budget position, sir?
Can I give you two suggestions?
Would you like me to set out what we actually put in our budget, which I'm very sure didn't get out in the press? Which is that instead of you being at the mercy of the supermarkets' low prices, that we want to use public procurement, the spend that we have to spend on every meal in every prison and in every public sector. We want 50% of that catering to come from either local British farmers or from any farmer that provides an even higher environmental
What's
standard.
wrong with 100%, by the way?
We have to start somewhere.
Why 50?
We have to start somewhere. And the point is that is long-term, multi-annual contracts where the prices are guaranteed. And for us, that's about literally diverting investment into this industry. And I'm very sure that hasn't got out into the press. And this is a whole package of which some things have been felt much less favourably than other parts.
Julia, thank you. I'm going to go to the lady up there, and then I'll come back to you, Julia.
Hello, I'm Molly. I'm a student here at Harper and also got a family farm in Hertfordshire. Just going back to something you said earlier about how you believe this is going to empower young people due to bringing forward planning for inheritance. I think that's a bit insulting to an extent. Farming's a difficult industry to go into in terms of the attractiveness, the wages you get, the long hours you do. And I just think this is making it less attractive for people that are in a family farm. Everyone in this room, certainly of my age, I'm sure we've all got jobs and we're the ones paying back into the economy. It's like, what are we getting in return? We're all going out working. You said if we bring forward inheritance and the passing over of assets, we can all come home early and have a nice cup of tea. That is so unrealistic. It's, like I said, quite insulting. That's just not the reality. I'm here studying a degree to go into something because I don't see how my family business, which has been going for 4 generations, can go on without me going to train in something to support that business. So I really don't get how Labour think that this is empowering young people at all.
Thank you, Molly.
I hear what you're saying, Molly. You're saying that you're training here to do a different role so that you can contribute because you're worried that the farm itself isn't profitable and you're worried about the viability of the family farm. I think we're worried about the viability of all farming. The productivity has been squeezed. So overheads, the cost of energy because of what's happening in Ukraine, the cost of employing people, and then the squeezed prices from supermarkets means that year on year on year, all farming, but particularly dairy and livestock, has been squeezed, and especially in those smaller family farms, to the point that we've lost 12,000 farms in the last 10 years, and we've lost 1 in 10 dairy farmers. So the number one priority for us, I understand you don't feel it yet, but I want to repeat it and reinforce it, is how we make food production in this country viable, productive and profitable again. Now, we don't want that investment to come from foreigners. We don't want to be bringing in cheap exports from America and from New Zealand that undercut our farm standards. We want to deliver for you a new EU agreement around photosanitation, which will mean that you can export goods so that you can earn more money and it become more profitable. And we want to use public investment to be able to drive prices of your goods higher, but we hope that one of the consequences of our inheritance tax policy reduces the cost of purchasing the land, which has become overinflated. So we use different levers. We are a Labour government, not a Conservative government. We use different levers. We use public investment to steer how we wish sectors to be supported. But the purpose of that is so that you have a choice about a business and a farm which is viable, productive and profitable. And the reason for that is because we rely on you. We want to have food security in this country. We don't want to be reliant on places like Ukraine where there are wars and then we see the price of grain and fodder and produce going up. That's not a future that we're looking for in this country. And we have other policies, I'm sure you've heard about them, the Great British Energy, where we are installing renewable projects so that within 7 years we'll have 100% renewable energy that will be nationally owned. What does that actually mean? It means that every person and business in this room can purchase your energy from a national company that will set the price that will be lower than any other energy that you can buy, because it is the cheapest form of energy, because we will control it rather than foreign investors controlling the overheads that you have to pay. That is our intention.
On my farm after I've had to sell the land.
Rather than speculate about buying energy from a nationalised company, I think it's interesting just to think ahead a little bit about, as implicitly asked, about the land market after this comes into play. And as I suggested earlier, I can see individual farming people at a disadvantage because of their exposure, because individuals die. The people who don't die are environmental charities. The people who don't die are the large companies. And the people who do, though, also die but get relief from this are the lifestyle buyers. And so in terms of supporting productive agriculture, it's not entirely clear at this point, and there are possible other models to play with in this, but this looks to be the way the cookie could well crumble. It's not obvious that this delivers the optimal farming use of land through the people who are more likely to be buying.
Could I just ask you on that? You know, lifestyle buyers can't demonstrate that they've put that land to productive use for the last 2 years before APR. So when we had the earlier debate between business relief and agricultural relief, the purpose of that is that there are many other businesses that aren't putting the land to production that would be paying inheritance tax at 40%. And the whole point of this proposal, which, by the way, is how we used to have inheritance tax pre-92, this isn't a new thing. This is just reverting to how it was 30 years ago. And by the way, British farming was doing much better then than it is now.
They could afford it then. That was the difference.
Because it was more profitable, and we come full circle, and we might even be able to agree on that one point. But the point is that where you have APR, we are allowing half the rate of inheritance tax because of the vital role in producing food. And if we don't have that distinction, then what you're doing is suggesting that all businesses with land should be given the same rate, and they're not.
You're going to make British farming profitable by getting prisons and dinner ladies to buy 50% of their food from British farmers. It's a bigger problem than that.
Billions of pounds.
This misses completely every functional part of a business other than the land.
Let's take some questions from the audience. A gentleman just there. Just say who you are and where you are. Who you are and where you're from, sir.
My name is Keith Gosney. I'm retired now, but I used to be a CEO of a big farming business. I'd like to share first something very quickly, if I may, that the principal of the college that I went to in 1969 said to all of the students, as you get older, you're going to come across politicians and politics. And there's something I'd like you all to remember. Think of a banana. When a banana starts off, it's green, so is a politician. When there's money around, invariably they turn bent, as a banana does. And when there's a decision to be made for the good of the country that might not get them re-elected, they turn yellow. And it seemed to me that was good advice then in 1969. Sadly, things haven't changed very much. And I'm intrigued to how you can support a business by taxing the hell out of it. That seems to be a unique way to go about it.
I can't imagine why all the other MPs refused to come this evening.
So, do you have a question, sir?
Yes, I do. It seems to me that if you're going to consult, you consult before you do something, not afterwards.
That's right. Yeah.
And it also seems that you've forgotten that farmers tend to live cash poor and die cash rich. And because you've made all these promises that you're not going to tax people like me on income tax, you're not going to raise VAT, you've got to go somewhere else to fill this black hole, whatever size it happens to be, and you've looked around and said, where's the money pot? Let's go for agricultural land. And I think you're so wrong, it's not true.
Thank you very much. Could I go to the gentleman just there?
Just to point out, if we increased income tax or corporation tax, that would be a further squeeze on day-to-day profits of already stretched farms. So that is what we have not done, and we are trying to divert public investment to make businesses, farming businesses. And we haven't talked about all the supply chains that rely and depend upon the work that you're doing. So it's because we don't want to squeeze those profits anymore that we haven't touched that. We've also frozen fuel duty. So some of the day-to-day taxes that farmers and farm-related or farm-adjacent businesses rely on, we have deliberately left those in order to support the really difficult viability that we recognise the sector has.
Just to pick up on that, income tax is across all people who earn. This is a tax that's set to raise 520 million in a year. That is 7% of the total income from farming on 2023 data. After you've dealt with returns to labour and so on, if you like, farming profit, that's 7%. And piled on top of, that's piled up, because that would be if it was spread across everybody in farming equally. It's piled on those people who die in that year. So, if you're looking at spreading it to cause least disruption in the economy, you spread it most widely. To raise 520 million off income tax would be something like a quarter of a penny. And that hit on farming accounts is piled up and sits over the minds clearly of a lot of people in the audience and further afield. This is disproportionate to what you're trying to achieve.
Can I say that I agree with him on something here? I think you'll enjoy this moment. I do agree with you. It's not intended to be felt evenly. It is absolutely meant to be felt disproportionately, and it is meant to be felt disproportionately by the largest, wealthiest landowners, particularly those that invest in land and don't use it for food production. And it will be felt much less the smaller the farm is and the more family generations that are involved. And that is entirely deliberate. You're right.
Can we go to the gentleman, because there's a number of hands and we haven't got all evening, but the gentleman there, just say who you are, where you're from, please, and I'm going to go to the chap at the back as well. We'll do two at once and then the chap there. Yeah,
I'm Andrew Thomas. I'm a chartered accountant, chartered tax advisor, advising farming clients. So, Julie, you mentioned earlier that you want to encourage farmers to hand over assets in life earlier on and to actually retire. Going back to 2019, the Office for Tax Simplification, which is a government body which has now been disbanded, made a recommendation that if you claim APR or BPR, you should not get the capital gains tax uplift on death that you do at the moment. So that if you are someone who is investing in land to avoid paying inheritance tax, get the uplift and not paying capital gains tax, at least if you don't get the uplift and someone sells the land, the Treasury will actually get some tax, but that won't penalise your working farmers. So if that is your intention, are you prepared to go back to the Treasury and actually lobby the original OTS proposal that will not penalise working farmers in the manner which this policy will?
We can certainly look into it, certainly. But that is a legacy from the previous government that we have not chosen. And remember, it's agricultural values, not market values. So we need to be clear, because I've heard lots of farmers who are being quoted astronomical values, which is then obviously pushing them into huge... I know you haven't, sir, but I think it's a part of this trying to keep this debate calm and factual so that we can reduce that anxiety. But I certainly will take this point back. Absolutely, it's a really good and useful technical point. I'm very happy to ask the question.
Just very quick.
I will take your technical question back. So thank you for that.
Can we just ask the chap there, and then the chap in the middle who's been waiting but very patiently.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Silas Jack. I am from North Oxfordshire, right next to Clarkson's farm. So basically, you like talking about inheritance tax from millionaires. I want to know what you're going to do to stop large companies like British Airways to stop them from buying agricultural land to put into carbon credit and offsetting carbon. They will inflate the prices of land to a point where young farmers that you're trying to introduce into agriculture will not be able to afford it because of the green agenda and net zero in the UK.
Thank you. And the chap in the middle, please.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just let's
course.
just go to the chap in the middle and take two at a time because we are running out of time. So
Julia, I
where
want
you
to
from?
thank you. I think actually that last little exchange you had with Jeremy, where you said that this is designed to clobber a couple of really broad shoulders, multi-millionaires, is very honest
Large
because it shows
landowners.
it's driven by ideology and not actually practical outcomes. So, which is, I think, it's really a bit scary and a bit cynical. I had another point to make, and I'm so incensed. It's really difficult to sort of speak coherently. But I think to further to that point, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. Is it okay for her to go and smack Timmy because he's got wealthy parents? Surely, it's not okay to hit anyone when the outcome is so detrimental to our industry. The final point. 500 million, the NHS costs about 21 million an hour to run. This is going to raise 23.8 hours of NHS. Is it worth it?
So the whole point of this proposal is to disincentivise non-agricultural purchase, particularly those who are coming from the city and looking for a tax loophole. That's the first intention, to change that behaviour. The second intention is to prevent land purchase that will then take land out of food production. We need to stop that. We need to reverse that trend. So it's about ensuring that people who are buying land are those who wish to farm it. So that comes back to both your point and the chap at the back there who wants to know about the carbon offset work. So you know that the new SFI schemes that have been available have been looking at some nature-based work, but it's largely gone, that the largest number of grants have gone to existing farmers to help them change their own work, whether it's around investing in their slurry production so that they can produce their own fertiliser and save money from imports, or whether it's around their woodlands. So it's small parcels of woodland on existing farm.
Could you address the point that this is something that's driven by ideology?
Yeah, so I don't know if you misunderstood me, sir. So here, Jeremy is an expert on how these land values and taxation works, and his comment was that this could have been felt universally, it could have been stretched across all farmers, and you could have all felt an equal share.
No, I was talking about the choice you made, if you wish to raise this money, not to do so across income tax generally.
Yes.
What you have made is not something that is across all farmers. It is across farmers who are individuals, so far as they own something, and at the point of death, it is a considerable extraction of cash from the business directed at a small number of people. You denied yourselves the big, heavy lifting working horses of the tax system, so you're focusing on a small fraction of the tax system left after the pledges, and then you've denied other parts of that in the choices made in the budget. So this is making a very particular cash call at very particular points, and actually it's across all privately owned business. The 30% of the UK economy that is privately owned family businesses is exposed to this. This comes then with a very particular agricultural concentration. And I wanted to pick up just simply on some of the points made about the interaction again between APR and BPR for land. You're right, agricultural property relief is on the agricultural value of land. If a farmer owns land that has a value the market would put on it above it, that then is not relieved by APR, which is why 30% of the value of a farmhouse is often exposed to tax. You have then business property relief, then is relief on market value, including on the land. Yeah. And business property relief is the core, contrary to most people's expectations, business property relief is the core relief for farmers. Yeah. What APR does is it protects the farmhouse that wouldn't otherwise be protected, and critically, for some of the comments that have been made about investors, it actually protects land. Because you need investors who don't want to farm to provide land that other people can rent. You don't have tenants if you don't have landlords.
As long as they rent it out, that's ideal.
Yeah, and we can talk about mechanisms to try and encourage that. So you want be careful about how you strand things, because these things have, as we picked up here, serious consequences, and it relies, therefore, on proper analysis and sound data. And this entire conversation started off from this head of a pin of 74% of APR claims being under $1 million, which is inadequate. That's an inadequate piece of data for the discussion that we've been having.
So can we just reply to the gentleman?
Just briefly on the ideology point.
Just to reply. So the point is that is a political choice not to increase income tax, or for those of you where it's business related, corporation tax. That is a choice. That's correct. That is, we have chosen as a government not to ask every business to keep paying more on a day-to-day profitability, and not to ask every employee to pay more on their take-home pay. Instead, this choice is that those who have accumulated assets at the point of death within that estate, above and beyond the thresholds that we've set out, which are multiplied if you are a family. So that's why we're trying to protect families. That is where we have put in a tax, because there are 7% of the very largest estates, so none of the farmers in this room, but very large estates of tens of thousands of acres, they are not paying any inheritance tax.
Yeah.
They are renting out to tenant farmers, and before these arrangements came in, so before 82, when these same rules applied for decades and hundreds of years, many of those very large, let's face it, landed gentry estates, they might have to sell off a very small parcel of land to one of those tenant farmers when their inevitable inheritance tax...
You're creating the same thing. You're rebuilding a new aristocracy. Let me explain why. Last week, you made UK agriculture uninvestable. Right? You say you want farmers to farm. Who's going to invest in farming under these circumstances? I'm not. I've thrown significant quotes for new machinery in the bin. I've invested millions in farming in my lifetime, and I have no intention to continue to do that after this.
What about this advice over here?
Let me finish and explain why. Actually, what you've done here is possibly the most unsocialist policy I've ever come across. So I'm really surprised the Labour government have done it. Right, I'll explain why. So if we can agree, well, no, we're not going to agree, but right. So agriculture, growing food, is now uninvestable. It returns so little, and now there's absolutely no reason to continue for its margin. Right, the return on capital on HEB figures is less than 1% return on the capital invested. That's why farming's different to any other business. No other business. If it was Dragon's Den, I walked in and said, I want 10 million quid, and I'm going to make you 0.5% on your investment. They'd throw you back out the window and mine back in the lift. So that's what's different about agriculture. So because of that, we get to my next point, that we can kind of establish with such low returns on capital, the businesses will not have the ability to pay that 20% tax bill. So they will be forced to sell. So that land is going to move into different hands. Who are those buyers going to be? Because agriculture is not investable anymore, they're not going to be farmers. They're going to be huge corporate institutional investors, probably based offshore, probably not paying tax in the UK. The likes of Microsoft, BlackRock, etc. Bill Gates, now the largest landowner in the USA. Exactly, coincidentally. But those are going to be the buyers, So what you're actually creating, so this goes back to, this is the new aristocracy. So you go, okay, then those guys can rent it to farmers if they're bothered to. What they really want it for is carbon offset. They want it for, solar development and all the things that really pay with land, that we all know really pay, we're owning lots of land.
The best of
you're going to end up with a new aristocracy of elite billionaires or huge companies that are going to own all the land. The peasant class or farmers that no longer have the opportunity. Exactly what socialism broke up. Or aimed to do for the last 100 years.
If I may, I think the people who are going to buy these very small parcels of land are going to be those whose family or couple are under 3 million. The small farmers of whom we've lost 12,000 because they've been...
So they can get bigger and pay tax as well? So they can expand and we have the same problem that...
Until now, they haven't been able to purchase land. They've been squeezed out of the market with overinflated prices. That's the first thing.
But they don't want to buy it anymore.
The second point,
they can't make money on it, and they're just going to get a tax bill.
It's come up quite a few times. So can we talk about this carbon offset and these investments that I know you're concerned about, and I completely can hear the level of concern you have. So best and most versatile land will not be used for these energy projects and for these carbon offsets. There are protections in place, which is about ensuring that food production is from the highest grade, and that only other types of land will be encouraged to look at different types of investment. And I think it's about
Strange you say that, because I've got a queue of developers wanting to put solar and batteries on my farm, and it does grow good.
Ed Miliband has approved 6,200 acres of solar panels on agricultural land.
I'm going to take the point from the chap at the back and then the lady there. Just say who you are, where you're from, please.
David Beckett from Worcestershire. I went to a conference a few years ago, and there's a gentleman there giving us a talk, and the one word he came up with that I thought was the most inspiring was, to create an economy, we need confidence. I'd like to know from each panel member, out of 10, where do they see the confidence level going forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just do that and just try and keep it to one-word answers, and then I'll come to the lady there. Jeremy, where do you see, out of 10, confidence going forward? In UK farming? Yes. Yeah.
Well, UK farming, or indeed private business, confidence is now a lot lower than it was 3 weeks ago. The shock across private business and down the food chain from employers' national insurance. I mean, I can think of farmers and veg processing businesses who are £300,000 to £500,000 down for next year on where they thought they would be between those impacts. And private business outside farming hasn't yet twigged the inheritance tax hit on major businesses because they've been so concerned about the immediate short-term hit. So I think in terms of the missing hole, I mean, the Chancellor talked about growth and investment. This budget wasn't about growth and investment. The missing hole in this is time there's recognition of the value of private UK business.
So out of 10, confidence?
At the moment, no. Well, I was heading lower than that. 1 or 2, is there.
Julia?
The hard facts is that interest rates have fallen, that growth rates are predicted at 2% year on year. The reality is that other parts of that budget package, which invests in the NHS that all businesses and families need, are showing that the country needs to go in a different direction. We need to put the infrastructure back in to this country. We can't keep hemorrhaging it. And that has given confidence. And the two things that I think will give confidence in the future, if we can work with a constructive dialogue together, is that EU agreement, which will enable those exports and stop you being undercut by cheap imports from the terrible post-Brexit deal that you got. And the second thing is this 50% procurement, directing public investment. The bills we have to pay, I want them to come to British farmers, so long-term, multi-annual contracts. And I think over time, I'm hopeful that will win back your confidence, which I recognise today is not as high as I would like.
And purely on, a point of information, the cost of 10-year money, which is what most of your loans will be geared to, is back at 4.6% as of yesterday. It hasn't fallen.
What's the number? Do you want to put a number on it, Julia? Well, it'd be good if you could.
I'm going to go for a 5.
Thank you.
That's very disciplined of me.
Thank you. Clive, a number.
So full disclosure here, as well as my family farming business, I actually own a couple of other non-farming businesses. My confidence could not be lower. I've already said farming, no I'm investing. The other businesses, no I'm investing. And anything that I invest going forward will be overseas. I am taking any money that I make out of UK companies now, and it will not be invested in this country. No way. Not until this is sorted, not until this changes. And I'm not, amongst outside of our farming bubble that we're in a little bit tonight here, amongst other people in the wider business community, some big, very successful business people, they all are exactly on that same page. They have no desire to invest in the UK now. This is not going to grow the economy. Isn't it Winston Churchill said that watching an economy trying to tax itself into growth is like watching a man standing in a bucket and trying to pull it up by the handle? It doesn't work. There's no economic example in history of increased taxation growing the economy. It's never happened. It'd be an economic miracle if Labour could do this.
So, a number from you, Clive?
Number.
Oh, number. Can I use negatives? Yeah.
Kelly.
First of all, you said that the procurement contracts that you're talking about will raise billions. They might cost billions, but they won't raise billions. As with all procurement, it's overinflated. So the farmer's not going to see a great deal of that, and it's just going to cost the UK more in taxes, ultimately, isn't it? And on the topic of hemorrhaging money, 28.5 billion on carbon capture projects over 5 years is currently being spent. I think I can probably speak for everyone in this room when I say there's no finer carbon capture tool than the soil. So what a waste of money. And then my final point is, you mentioned in Parliament this week that the Conservatives had left the farmers to struggle. That may well be the case, but Labour have stuck in the boot and the knife and twisted it. Confidence? 2. I'm hopeful, but I'm not confident.
Okay, Carl, I apologise, you've been very on a limb at the end.
I just can't believe no one wanted to talk about agri-tech economics, really. I will make a comment, though, if I may. This is clearly a really emotive issue, and for all the right reasons, and there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. And my call to the government would be, you're expecting mass structural change within the rural sector. What support are you giving them for that structural change? And I don't mean, it doesn't necessarily mean subsidies or financial support. I'm talking about helping people transition. Yeah. And this is a massive gap I see in the UK. It exists in other countries where governments have decided to just pull the pin on all subsidies, but what they put in place was support networks. So in some countries there are networks of rural financial counsellors to help people transition free of charge through whatever turmoil they've got. And that can be everything from succession through to the latest tax implications.
I think that's really good advice. And, you know, since we've left Brexit, left the EU under the last government, there hasn't really been a plan about what the replacement funds are. And I think the schemes that you've had, so whether it was the remaining basic grant or whether it's the start of the SFI, they've been sort of pilots. They're still sort of testing the water as to what they think could and couldn't work. And I think it's really valid that no matter what's coming in its place and what fraction of that is around nature and what fraction of that is around, I would hope, around the R&D and the automation and the AI side of things, which is, you know, that future of farming, they absolutely need support. Given everything else that's going on with farmers, that mental well-being that we touched on earlier, there are a few pilot schemes. There was a brilliant one in Shropshire, you know, bringing out those sort of medical support for farmers at the livestock shows. But actually, we need to put much more into that. We need to absolutely put in there. But it's really early days. You know, we were elected in July. The last government had 8 years to sort out the post-Brexit funds, and they didn't. We've got to get it right. It's so important. I didn't say it earlier, but my previous role is that I worked in Brussels on European funding for 5 years. That was my job, on the technical details of the eligibility and the criteria of grants. And the exact problem that we're seeing with ELMS and SFI is exactly that they haven't put in the protections to ensure the right types of beneficiaries, ensure that they receive the right percentage of funds, i.e., you know, individual farms rather than large corporates. And there needs to be technical people in the room when we're drawing up the replacement. And the last government didn't care about the details. This government, however boring, they do care about the details. And so let's see if we can work together to inform that process.
Thank you. Carl, a number, and you wanted to make a further...
Just one little small response on that. What I was mainly talking about is when the farmers are making decisions, they're sitting around a kitchen table. And they're making those decisions in isolation, or they've engaged an advisor. There is a massive role here for someone who has empathy with what they're going through and understanding all the challenges that they have and in their specific context. These policies are all context specific and will affect individuals and individual farming families. And that needs to be understood. And there needs to be the support to go with that. And that's a combination of not only technical advice, but it's also mental health and counselling type support.
A chunk of that was done with the Farming Resilience Fund. And the question is whether the new government wishes to continue the Farming Resilience Fund.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I was going to mention that, thank you, Jeremy, because that was we were involved in analysing that.
It was very successful.
With the removal of BPS, only about 20-25% of farmers had actually even started proactively planning for the removal of BPS, but that was a few years ago. I know that's not the case now.
Thank you. Could you put a number on confidence?
I would go with a 2 or a 3.
So, there we have it. Julia, they do some people say that the first step on the road to a U-turn is denying that there's going to be a U-turn, or to double down on your policy pledge. And the Treasury appeared to do that, saying that they're going to press ahead with this. Do you think that there is any wriggle room on this APR/IHT, agricultural property relief, inheritance tax announcement? Is there any wriggle room at all?
So I think you've probably all worked out I'm not at the top of the tree in government, so it's probably above my pay grade to know whether they're going to change their mind. But I'll tell you what I do know, which is that there are at least 100 rural MPs like me, and we repeatedly and vociferously, and as you can see, I'm not backwards in coming forwards, put forward our concerns, your concerns. When we can start to get some more nuanced data sets, that really helps in terms of painting that picture. And I will keep doing that, and I know those other 100 rural MPs will keep doing that. We're looking forward to meeting in Parliament on Tuesday. I hope more of you are coming. Let's book in a specific time.
There's plenty coming.
Yeah, I know there are.
I don't think you're going to fit them all in.
And that's surely what Parliament should be, isn't it? If we're your voice, surely we should be always available, not just on Tuesdays, but always available to listen, learn, reflect. So I can pledge that I will keep doing that. But until I'm a little bit further up the food chain, I can't really change the policy right here tonight.
Thank you very much. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it for this week's Farmers Weekly Question Time. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and making this evening such a success. A few more thank yous before we go. I'd like to thank Harper Adams University for hosting us. Thank you to our sponsors, Lantra, for making this event possible. Thank you to our panel, Julia Buckley, Labour MP for Shrewsbury, Jeremy Moody, Secretary and Advisor to the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers, Staffordshire farmer Clive Bailey, founder of the Farming Forum, and farmer and AHDB Dairy Knowledge Exchange Manager Kelly Seaton too, and also, not forgetting, very patiently at the end, Carl Berrant, Director of the Global Institute for Agritech Economics, Food, Land and Agribusiness Management here at Harper Adams. Thank you very much. You've been absolutely great, and I think you all deserve a big round of applause. So thank you and have a safe journey home. Well, that's it for this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. The Farmers Weekly Question Time event recorded at Harper Adams University in Shropshire on Thursday, the 14th of November 2024. We hope you found the debate useful. Do remember to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like what you hear, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. But for now, thank you for listening. I'm Johan Tasker. Goodbye.